Well, I appreciate y'all coming. My name is Gabe Jenkins. I'm the Deer and Elk Program Coordinator for the department. I've worked on CWD my entire career here with the agency, a little over 12 years. I want this to be really informative. I want you guys to be able to ask questions. I want to make sure when we all walk away from this that we have a very good understanding of what the disease is. So I'll talk for 30, 45 minutes, kind of go through things, and then we'll open it up for questions. Chronic wasting disease, CWD, acronym for the disease. What is it at its basic element? So the disease essentially is a transmissible, so a disease that's passed, that's neurological, so the brain, a passable disease of the brain that affects the deer species, meaning deer, elk, moose, and caribou. This would not apply to animals like an antelope or a black buck, so cervids, animals that grow antlers, if you will. CWD, it's essentially this contagious brain disease that creates holes in the brain, similar to a sponge. This would be a slide of a normal brain tissue, what your normal brain would look like without chronic wasting disease. If you bump down below, in this picture down here, if you can see these kind of big, large openings or holes, that's a brain that has chronic wasting disease. So it causes the brain to deteriorate, forms holes, and like a sponge, essentially. It's a great analogy of what the brain looks like from chronic wasting disease. It's similar to mad cow. So many of y'all are familiar with mad cow. Same suite of species, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit more, but same concept, but it's species specific. Mad cow affects cattle. CWD affects members of the deer family. And it's always fatal. There's no vaccine or treatment. So once you get the disease, that's it. You are going to succumb to that in some form or fashion. There's not a way to prevent it as far as how the animal gets it or treat it once they have it. So clinical meaning the point at which the animal is exposed to the disease and then it works through and then you can tell it. So that clinical meaning that they show the outward signs of the disease. And these are what people are really familiar with when you think about CWD. It can take a long time. It can be as short as 12 months to 16 months. You know, I've got 15 up here, or as long as 60 months, so 5 years from the time an animal is exposed and has the disease until the time that it shows outwardly that it has chronic wasting disease. So it has a very long incubation period from exposure to outward showing signs. In the clinical sign, you have behavior changes. So they get this chronic wasting disease look like at the top right. They stagger around, they lose their fear of humans, severe weight loss, trembling, shaking, so the animal looks off. Usually excessive drinking, a lot of saliva on their mouth, they're urinating on themselves, they look off. I mean, you can tell that, most people see that. So this is the clinical signs, the signs that you're going to see on the last few stages of life with the disease. So what causes CWD? It's a prion protein, and we're going to get kind of into some biology, kind of some crazy stuff on how this disease works, but I'll try to explain it the best that I can for y'all. So a prion protein. So thinking back to high school biology, what's a protein first? Let's break the disease down for you. A protein is a large, complex set of molecules that play critical roles in the body. They make up hundreds of thousands of smaller units called amino acids. So some of that biology term there. Those proteins in your body serve many different functions. They can be antibodies, they can be enzymes, they can be messengers, so sending data back and forth through the body. They can provide storage and support. So a variety of different ways, a variety of different things proteins do in your body. But proteins are not alive. You can't kill them, you can't break them down, they're just a function that's inside of you. So a prion protein prion is really a label to a protein. It's a type of protein. And essentially what prion means, or the best way that I've heard to explain it, it's a rogue protein. So it's off, something looks different. And when those proteins are being made, they're folded together. And for some reason in this disease, when the body is making those and they're folding them to create those proteins, it's misfolded for some reason. And that misfold is what they call a prion. And then once that protein misfolds, it stops functioning like a normal prion, like a normal one would. And your body doesn't know what to do with it. And so it kind of cast it off to the side. You know, the body knows how to make a protein and knows how to fold it correctly, but when it misfolds, it just does that, and then it casts it away. And then their interaction, so this misfolded prion protein is kicked off to the side, and then every time that prion protein interacts with another protein, it causes that protein to misfold as well. So then you start this accumulation of prion proteins through the body. The best way that I've heard this explained in kind of a little more elementary terms is, you know, a prion protein is proteins that are found in the central nervous system, so the spinal cord and brain. So it's sending messages back and forth, your spinal cord to your brain. Think about it like a paper airplane, all right? So your body knows how to make paper airplanes. It's the only thing it knows how to do. Paper airplanes are going up and down, sending messages, okay? For some reason, when a paper airplane is made, it's misfolded wrong and it creates a ball. And now you enter this ball into the stream of airplanes going back and forth. And as that ball moves up and down the central nervous system and through the brain, it's running into other paper airplanes. And what it's causing it to do is smash into those paper airplanes, crumpling that airplane and make it into a ball. And so then you get this accumulation effect where as time goes on, more and more balls, the body casts it off, it gets put into the brain and the central nervous system, and they degrade over time and create these holes in the brain. So this kind of picture here, just as an analogy of a normal form of what a prion protein would be on the right, just a visual example of a abnormal or misfolded protein. So your folds are going to be this green back and forth, and they're misfolded some reason. So CWD, we've already mentioned this. What other diseases are there? There's a couple different forms of the disease. Scrapie in sheep and goats. Scrapie's been on the landscape since Jesus was here. Long, long time scrapie's been on the landscape in the Middle East and in the US. There's a mink variety that's specific to mink. We've already talked about cattle and mad cow. There's also a people form, Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease. It's in humans. It's completely different than it is in all the others. And then we have one case where it's jumped the species barrier, and we had a variant form of CJD from mad cow. So if y'all would remember back in the mid-2000s, early 2000s, I'm sorry, in the British, in England, they had a bunch of positive cattle with mad cow get into the food system. And it was, you know, millions of pounds of beef that got into the food chain. People actually were able to get a variant form of mad cow by eating consumed beef at that point. And that's the only time that we've seen that. So as far as humans and chronic wasting disease, there's a ton of research going into this. I will say that we're kind of low on the food chain as far as funding goes. I mean, when you think about where does it lie in priorities, and the human form is going to take very high precedent. Cattle form is going to be higher because those are, you know, forms of food that we eat. And then lastly, cervids. So right now, there's no scientific evidence that says that it's transmissible to people. So if you eat an infected deer or an elk that has CWD, all evidence says right now that you cannot get it. Public health officials continue to do research, and we look at this. We know the disease takes time. It's a very long process to do these research studies, and it's very expensive. Been a lot of media go into this. You know, we heard about zombie deer and apocalypse, lots of different things with CWD in the news media about people contracting CWD from eating venison. But as of right now, we don't have anything that tells us, yes, you can get it by eating it. So as far as transmission, how does it move across the landscape? From animal to animal, through the environment, lots of different ways that we know about, and there are other ways that we're not sure at this point. Probably the most important is direct transmission from animal to animal. So, you know, when you think about a whitetail especially, they're a very social animal. They're licking on each other, especially those female family units, grooming each other. You know, we know that can happen, and that's by far the most effective way that the disease can be passed through the landscape. It can also have a direct effect based off of your density. So the more deer, the more elk you have in the landscape, the more possibilities you have to move that disease quicker along the landscape by them interacting with each other. We also know that artificial feeding, so when you bring them all into one spot and they congregate and they feed in the same spot, you're going to increase your abilities to transmit the disease by forcing them all into one smaller area. We also know that it stays in the environment. There's been a lot of research going into this in the last couple years, and stuff come out about how it persists. We know that it can be taken up by plants and being plant material, and an animal could get it by eating a plant with the infected prion. We also know that it can be in the soil and persist in the soil for a time. So if an animal comes along like a mineral site or bare dirt and eats that, it could be infected. And there's new science that just came out that also says that some soil helps to degrade or break down the disease. So depending on your soil type, it could increase the persistence of the disease, but some soil types actually break it down and it could decrease the disease. So that's got some promise there. We'll watch that and see where it goes with it. And then also we know that there have been very high prevalence rates in wild animals and in the captive facilities as well. So some of this I've kind of already talked about, just in review. For wild deer, for wild cervids, it's deer, elk, moose, mule deer, one I didn't mention, and caribou. All the different modes of transmission, kind of got ahead of myself, I apologize. Saliva. Saliva is one thing that we know is the most infectious material out there on an animal, whether that, when you think about all the different fluids and body things that's inside a deer, saliva has the highest risk. And that's why it's the biggest concern for whitetail, because they're such a social animal. There's also a mode that we didn't talk about was between fences. So with the captive industry and the wild industry, being able to pass those diseases back and forth through the fence. If you've got a higher fence, you know that deer love to walk that fence on one side or the other, and they don't respect those fences. And so a deer is a deer whether it's outside the fence or inside a fence, so there can be that interaction on the wild and captive side of things. We also know through feces and urine, if that's on the landscape, as they're feeding along, they could pick up some fecal material. That fecal material has those prions in it, they can ingest that. So infection rates, when you think about this, what % of the animals in the country have that? It really depends on where you are and what kind of species of cervid you are. They vary greatly between herds. You can have one herd in the county that could have very low prevalence, and then another part of the county that have it very high. It's just simply not moved or transmitted through the herd that quickly yet. When you look at a national scale, it's really only less than 1% of the entire elk population, but that's not really a fair assessment when you think about some places where it's really high. Whitetail, we know that it's higher. Whitetail, for some reason, have a higher infection rate, probably due to their behavior. We also know that it's more prevalent in males than females, and that's directly related to their behavior. When you think about a female cervid, female deer, female elk, they're going to move less, they're going to have a smaller home range. Those adult males during the breeding season, if you guys are hunters, you know how they just go to the wind, and they're moving, they're interacting with all kinds of animals. So an older age class male, that animal's been on the landscape the longest, which increases your chances of picking up the disease. The longer you're alive, the higher your risk of picking up the disease. And then also, the more you move and the larger geographic area that you inhibit, the better your chances are. So just by their behavior, that males typically have a higher infection rate than females because they're interacting and covering more ground. There's lots of computer simulations about what it's going to look like on herds through time, decades down the road, but we're starting to see this now, where we're seeing herd impacts from CWD in the West. So we know that if we don't manage it and do what we can, that it can impact those populations. It might not be in our generation, it could be in the next generation or kids' generations, but it will impact the herds. And we'll get into this a little bit more, but they've had it in the landscape for 60 years in the West, and they're just now seeing those declines. So we have to think about things in a very long-term, big picture approach. So for Just an example, you've heard a lot about what the disease is, what it looks like. What deer's sick? It's pretty obvious, that deer on the right is sick for sure. Look at that behavior, look at the body condition. But with chronic wasting disease, that real nice mature buck there on the left can also have the disease. And so it's why we do what we do as an agency is that there's that incubation period from the time that it's exposed to the time that it looks like this animal, it has the disease. It's shedding the prions, it's passing that, it's increasing the prevalence rates of the disease through exposure with other animals, and it looks perfectly healthy and normal. And that's the scary one, in my opinion, on all of this, is that deer on the right, we all see that for what it is. We know that it's off. But the deer on the left looks fine. And it's just got early stages of the disease. And so while we have to do our due diligence as an agency, as hunters, as processors, all the different walks of life that we all represent with the disease to make sure that we're testing all varieties of animals. So kind of segueing here, this is a lot of different things. We just kind of throw this up on myths of what CWD is not. A lot of these you've heard these terms, and it is not the truth. CWD is not a government lie. It is legitimate. CWD has not been detected in Kentucky. We've looked and looked, we've not found it. So another myth that it's a virus, that it must run its course. It's not a virus. We're very confident on how it works and what it looks like. It's not caused by a mineral deficiency. If we just simply put out minerals on the landscape, that it will fix it or cure it. That's not the case at all. One that many of us have heard in the last 6 months, it's not a bacteria that can be cured with antibiotics. There was a professor in Louisiana, some people in Penn State were talking about it. They'd found the cure. They were going to fix it. That is not legitimate. You're not going to hear us stand up and bash science. There's both sides of science. But there are thousands and thousands of research papers that say this is what it is, and one individual on one research that says it's another thing. By all means, I hope he's right. I hope that it just takes some antibiotics and we can put some stuff on the landscape and fix it, but there's nothing that points to that. So if you've heard that in the news in the last 6 months, that is not legitimate. It's not another disease that's been misdiagnosed. We're very confident what it is, what it looks like. The act of baiting does not introduce CWD. So by you going out and putting corn or food on the ground, that does not introduce CWD. So a lot of people think baiting and CWD, I want you to understand clear that baiting does not introduce CWD, but baiting will increase the transmission and increase the prevalence of CWD. Right now, it's not deadly to humans. We have no research to show that is. Another lie that it's super deadly to humans. And then also EHD. If you're familiar with EHD, an acronym that kills a bunch of deer, EHD, blue tongue, mad cow, it's not that. It's CWD. EHD, if you think about it, this is the time of year when you start to see EHD or epizootic hemorrhagic disease. You see these large die-offs of whitetail. It's caused by a little midge. We experience this every 4 to 7 years in the state. We had a large outbreak in 2017 in East Kentucky. We've had some here if you all were here for a while. 2007 was really bad here. 2012 we had it a little bit in the region. So that's a cyclic disease that we see. There's nothing you can do to prevent it. They get it, they're exposed, some of them die, and we move on. It can impact the population for a year or two, but they rebound. CWD is completely different. So do not get those confused. Even though it's a 3-letter acronym, they are very different. So kind of moving on from here, what does CWD look like in the U.S.? Where did it start? And kind of a timeline from the disease from the beginning. It was first identified in a captive mule deer in 1967 in northern Colorado, southern Wyoming. So if you can kind of see that red dot right there is kind of the epicenter of the disease. More than likely, in 67, we're pretty confident it had been on the landscape, it had been in the environment for a while. They just didn't know it was there, didn't know to look for it. So some time goes through, not a whole lot was going into CWD, not much thought, not a lot of testing. It pops in 1981 in a captive mule deer in Canada in a zoo. So there was essentially how that hopped, that move from northern Colorado to Canada was the movement of a captive deer. A captive deer in that facility went to that zoo and then exposed those animals in that zoo, and then they had one die in 1981. Also in 81, Colorado starts beginning to test. They start looking in their wild, and they find their first wild animal discovered in 81. It was an elk in Colorado. 1985, first wild mule deer in Colorado, and now you're going to start picking up the pace. 86, wild deer in Wyoming. Decade goes by, 1997, South Dakota, 98, Oklahoma, 99, Nebraska, 2000, Saskatchewan, 2002, New Mexico, and all of a sudden now we have Wisconsin and Illinois. So in really a decade and a half, it went from a small area in northern Kentucky, northern Colorado, southern Wyoming to all across the country, and now it jumps to Mississippi, and we find it in the east. So a couple things to think about on examples or ways that this could happen. There's no possible way that disease moved that fast across the entire population of deer and elk by just natural migration. So you've got a couple other things that would point to potential ways. One, states just started looking for it. It had been on the landscape for a while. It started to become a player. States heard about the disease. We probably ought to look into this. They start looking into it. Sure enough, they find it. That's one example. Another example would be the movement of cervids, whether they're wild cervids or captive cervids. People have them, during the 80s and 90s and in the 70s, we were, like every other states were moving cervids around. We were still restoring deer, restoring elk, trying to get those populations built up. So whether it's on the wild side or the captive side, an explanation of how that disease replicated and moved across the country. And then also, we as hunters could be potentially part of the blame. We like to go, we like to travel. If the opportunity presents itself, we know that body fluids have CWD, have the prion, the brain. You could travel to Colorado, shoot a bull elk. That elk's got CWD in its brain. You bring it home. What do you want to do? You want to have this nice gyro over the fireplace. You've got its brain. What do you do with the brain when you get it back? You pitch it on the back 40 and you kind of introduce the CWD unknowingly. And so us as hunters, of how we've moved carcasses and infectious material around could be a source of how that's moved. And so that was all going on, and we didn't understand that. We didn't, at that point in research in the disease, we had no idea. So, and also thinking in 2002, what were we doing in this state? If you think about it, we were moving elk. We were getting elk from Utah, North Dakota, all of our western states, and bringing those elk in. And so when Wisconsin and Illinois found it in 2002, we put the brakes on our elk herd. We had more plans for our elk population to bring in even more than what we did. But at that point, when they found it east of the Mississippi, it was just kind of all this unknown of where is it at, what do we need to do, and it wasn't worth the risk anymore. So we stopped. One good thing I can say about that is that whether it was luck or foresight that we had, but where our elk came from, we have states that are now CWD positive, like Utah, where the majority of our elk came from. However, they've not documented an animal with CWD in those herds. So we watch that, we look at that every year, we look at where our elk came from, those source populations, and then we follow up with those states to see if they've documented the disease in the herds, and they have not to this day. So it's something that makes us feel a little bit better that we could have potentially have a risk there, but we've not seen that yet. So 2002, big year. Now things are really going to start moving in the 2000s. So 2005, they found it in New York and in West Virginia. 2010, Virginia and Missouri. 2011, Maryland. 12, Pennsylvania. 14, Ohio and Iowa. 15 Arkansas, and then just last year, Mississippi and Tennessee. So 26 of the 50 states, 6 of our 7 border states have the disease. Indiana is the only one that's not detected it. Indiana does some testing, both on their captive and wild herds. They focus in the north where they're close to Illinois, but there is some testing going on there. 4 Canadian provinces, 4 other countries, Norway, Finland, Sweden, and South Korea. How in the heck did it get there? Well, it's pretty simple, movement of captive. South Korea is the prime example where there were captive, I believe they were captive elk that were positive. They sent them to South Korea for the meat industry. They were going to butcher them, and then they brought in the disease, and now they have it in South Korea. So we've seen this dramatic increase in detections in the eastern U.S. All the states in the country are looking. You know, we've been looking since 2002, and it's not something that's just, you know, new on our radar. So visually, just as a visual for y'all, the closest that we have it, so these red dots, the red circles are 65-mile buffers. There's a little red dot in the middle of these buffers, if you can see them. These are known CWD positive wild animals. If you go here in Missouri, this is just north of Cape Girardeau. It is 68 miles from that animal to the border of Ballard County, which is Ballard WMA. So 68 miles from us in Missouri. If you look down here in Tennessee, this very most northern positive, it is it's 65 miles from us in Missouri. It's 68 miles from us in Tennessee, so a 3-mile difference. So from this positive, the very northernmost positive in Tennessee, to the Fulton County line is 68 miles. So very, very close. As far as what our other sister agencies are doing in those states, Missouri has a very good handle on where they think the disease is and what its prevalence looks like. Missouri tests thousands and thousands of deer every year, and they do a fantastic job. And it is a huge undertaking for Missouri Department of Conservation. And they feel that it's at very low densities there in kind of that Boot Hills region. Tennessee is the complete opposite. Now, Tennessee, in December, they found their first positive. They found 10 of them at once, and they're a little over 200 positive. So they went from not even knowing they had the disease 8 months ago to having over 200 positives, and they estimate in that core area just east of Memphis that it's 30% prevalence rate in their bucks. So very, very high in Tennessee. And so we are watching what's going on in Tennessee very diligently. So for us, what have we been doing? What does sampling look like? What is our surveillance strategies? What have we been doing since 2002 when we started collecting and testing? So, you know, Wisconsin and Illinois found it in 2002. That's when all the eastern states started jumping on board and started looking, and we did the same. So for us, we have a very targeted approach on how we sample for the disease. You know, we're a small agency with very limited resources, very limited staff. We want to make sure that we sample the very best of our abilities and be very cognizant with our finances. But we also realize the disease could be on the environment at a very, very low prevalence. How many samples do you need? I mean, we've got over 1 million whitetail. We harvest 130, 150,000 deer a year. And we simply can't afford to test everyone. So we have to be very cognizant of that and focus our resources. And so what does that look like for us? So we have basically a risk assessment model that we use to help us focus our sampling efforts across the state. And it's kind of this heat map, if you will. So we get samples from every county in the state every year. Each county has what we kind of classify as a risk. The darker that color, that county, if you will, the higher we think that county has a risk of having CWD. And so we determine how many samples we want to collect annually. That goes into our model, and it comes up with a number of samples that we need to collect annually in that county. Things that go into that risk assessment model are the number of wild deer. You know, if you have a really high deer population, you have a higher risk. You know, if you've got elk, that's one. proximity to other CWD positive areas. So if you think about it, if you're out here close to where it is in Missouri and Tennessee, you've got a higher risk. The number of processors and taxidermists that you have in your county, when you think about processors and taxidermists, they're dealing with some of the most infectious materials, that skeletal material, that brain. You could be bringing in more material to a county, so that's what we perceive as a higher risk. We also look at the captive cervid industry, how many facilities we have in each county, how many movements, how much deer are moving back and forth with those facilities, and all that basically to come in and come up with a risk. So that's the approach that we use on how many samples we try to collect every year. So think about it, we've got a county, we'll pick Franklin County, the county we're in, we know we need 35 samples. So what does that look like for our staff? So we have two forms of strategies on how we collect those animals. One is just a targeted approach. It's very passive, meaning we're not actively going out looking for these, but these are our high-risk animals. So animals that act sick, they look off, and those are very high risk. The ones that really have the behavior, the outward symptoms of chronic wasting disease. People call us, we get these calls. I would say our staff get a call every day somewhere across the state of, I've got a deer in my backyard, it just doesn't look right, or it's not afraid of me. It doesn't, it's walking in circles. There are lots of things that could be wrong with that deer, but we need to go out, put that animal down, pull that sample, do a necropsy on it to find out what it is. So we try to put as much effort on that as an agency as we can when we get those calls to get out there and get that animal down. And that's one of my messages I want you all to hear. If you have an animal that you see that's acting sick, won't leave, doesn't look right, call us. Call us, email us, call your local officer, let us know. Because we want to try to find it and find out what's wrong with that deer or that elk. So this is a year-round effort. 24/7, we're getting those calls, fielding those, trying to get out there when we can and test those animals. The other strategy that we have is our active surveillance. So this is the one that we will spend the majority of our time, where the majority of our samples come from. And so that comes in a couple different forms. So roadkills. We try to pick up as many roadkills as we can and test those animals. This time of year, that sample doesn't last long. You got a couple hours. But we're on the field, we've got staff going out in the field, on the roads, staff going everywhere. We try to pick those up when we can. And then going into that normal deer and elk. So those hunter harvested deer, going back to that picture that I showed of what deer's sick, either one of them. So that's where we focus on our normal deer. We go to processors, we go to taxidermists, places deer hunters like to frequent, and collect those samples. And that's the bulk of them. But that's the majority of where every state spends their time and effort. Those are the easiest ones to get. So it's kind of our strategy. We know that some of them have the disease, they just aren't showing the signs. Many positive animals, and that's how most states find it, is that animal that looks perfectly fine, but it has the disease, and it's just early onset at that point. So for us, our biggest hope and focus in doing all this is that when we find it early, and we're able to do something about it. So why all of our efforts go into that. The only reliable USDA-approved test for the disease, the animal has to be dead. No other way. And you need the head of that animal. So a little squeamish if you think about this, but this is the back of a deer's head. We're looking for two different pieces of tissue in that skull. One, the obex, and some lymph nodes right here. The obex, so this is, get in your reference here, this is looking back on these two parts of the brain, the occipital condyles. This is where your spinal cord is moving up through the brain, or up through the body to the brain. And I guess I'll use the analogy of Waterboy. And if you thought of the medulla oblongata, that's that spot you're looking for, where the spinal cord is coming up and it's one tissue and it's starting to fork into your right brain and your left brain. Right there at that fork is called the obex. And that piece of tissue is what we collect and what everybody collects for the test. And then we also pick up lymph node just below that obex. Now, where the disease shows up is different depending on what animal you are. On a whitetail, the chronic wasting disease will be first detected where we know we can find it first in the body, in those lymph nodes. But on an elk, it can be found in the lymph node or the obex. So depending on what animal we have, we might just pull the lymph node, but if it's an elk, we got to get both of those. So 2 tissues are necessary when we're doing that. And when you think about this and the testing, this is another form of complication that we have because, we're really trying to target these older age class males. Well, if you're a hunter, a lot of times that older age class male is headed to the taxidermist. And you can already see, this cut right here from an animal that you're going to get mounted would not be acceptable if you're a hunter. So we have to, work with the hunter. They say, yeah, I'm going to get this thing tested, or I'm going to get it mounted. Then we have to follow up and work with the taxidermist, let the taxidermist do what they need to do, pull that cape off, cut those antlers, and then we can get our samples. So multiple steps in that process for us. So from this point, looking backwards over the last 17 years, as a state, we've tested a little over 30,000 deer and elk, the majority of those being whitetail. We've collected, you can see that's a heat map, so the darker the color, the more samples that we've collected in the county. Just last year as an example, we tested 1,755 whitetail and 53 elk. Once again, samples from every county, kind of some higher densities here in the northeast part of the state, focusing there in the, around Bowling Green and the western coal fields, and then another high region in western Kentucky. So that's kind of our annual plan is, around 2,000 is what we try to focus on. So for us, we're looking, doing a lot of our hard work and doing our due diligence to look for disease. What happens when we find it? This is the biggest question why a lot of us are here. What are you going to do as Fish and Wildlife Agency? And so we have a chronic wasting disease response plan. We've had this plan since we started testing in 2002. It's on our website. This is a living, breathing document. So it's there. We update it monthly, sometimes weekly. Sometimes it's just annually based off of what research comes out, what we know, what we're doing. We want you all to see that. We also want you to know we're prepared. We're prepared on trying to handle that if and when we find it. It's our responsibility as the Fish and Wildlife Agency to inform our hunters, inform our landowners, our constituents about the disease, where it is, where it's not, and what that looks like. So we want to do everything we can to help you be aware of the disease. The plan is really a first year only plan. It doesn't go decades down the road. It really only addresses our first year, and I'll explain that a little bit more in detail. We want to try to use our hunters as much as we possibly can. We want our hunters to do the work, and as far as getting out, recreating, harvesting deer, and we will try to facilitate collecting those samples and getting those tested. Based off of what we find in our first year, what we know about the disease, that will dictate our responses in years 2, 3, 4, and decades down the road. So it's really hard for us to plan and say this is what we're going to do 10 years down the road because we don't know what it's going to look like on the landscape. We can use the example of Tennessee and Missouri. Tennessee didn't even think they had it, and they got it everywhere in there east of Memphis. Missouri's got it at a very low prevalence. So our response as an agency would be two very totally different things depending on what we find. So how does this plan, how is it enacted? Really by 3 different ways. If we find a wild deer or wild elk that's positive with the disease, that's one way the plan is enacted. The second is if a captive deer or an elk is detected with the disease, we respond as an agency and we do our due diligence on our part on the wild side of things. And then the third is that if one of our neighboring states detects a positive deer or elk within 30 miles of our border. So we picked 30 miles because that's kind of average dispersal rate or a long dispersal rate of a yearling animal. So when mom kicks them out of the herd, they got to go find their new territory. A pretty long movement would be 30 miles. So we picked 30 miles thinking that's there. So going back to our previous slides when we talked about we know it's 60 miles, 65 miles, we're not that far in reality of potentially having to enact our response plan in West Kentucky. So for us, our top priority is to prevent the disease spread. So when we find it, we want to slow its progression as much as we feasibly can to try to hold it at bay as long as we can. If what we would do on the captive side of things was enhanced surveillance. Dr. Stout is here. A lot of that falls on the Department of Agriculture, but we want to be a good partner agency, work with them, support them on the captive side of things, but also focus on the wild deer around those facilities. So we would enhance our surveillance around those captive facilities.
How many, or are there any, captive cervids being tested on a regular basis in any of these facilities at this point?
So we have a little over 100 facilities in the state. Those facilities, there are 2 different testing programs based off of what you do with those animals. And so there's a breeding facility, if you will, and every animal that dies in that breeding facility must be tested. And then there are these shooting operations, and the first 10 animals that die every year have to be tested on a shooting operation. If an animal comes in from Indiana, that animal automatically gets tested no matter what type of facility it goes to when it dies. So on the wild side of things, what we would do, we would have a very enhanced surveillance, both on our target side of things and our active. So working with our hunters, putting in even more emphasis in getting more hunter harvested animals, all effort we possibly can on any sick deer or elk that we have. At that point, we would enact feeding and baiting bans in our CWD response area. So wherever that disease is, we would put a designation, probably at a county level. This is our CWD surveillance zone. That feeding and baiting ban would go in. We would also restrict the movements of carcasses. So if you're a hunter and you're in that surveillance zone, you cannot take your harvested animal out unless it's just meat, or you couldn't be bringing carcasses in. So really restricting those carcass movements, working with our hunters, working with our processors and taxidermists, making sure that that carcass material from those harvested animals are disposed of properly. So we're not increasing the prevalence. Going back to it, we want to contain and reduce the prevalence as much as we possibly can. We would also probably increase our bag limits, increase our season lengths to try to encourage hunters to take more deer, to lower that deer density. So what's at stake? We like deer and we like shooting them, but if you live in this state, deer affect you in one way or the other. Deer hunting is extremely important to us. It's important to our agency, and I would argue probably important to a lot of you that are in this room, but it affects everybody. We have an annual economic impact of deer hunting of $550 million annually that goes into this economy. So whether you are a hunter, or you are a gas station owner, or a hotel owner, or a small business, deer processor, taxidermist, it affects everybody in their walk of life. Even our little old elk herd, it provides a pretty good bit of opportunity. We have an annual economic impact of $3 million annually that goes into this economy just by elk hunting. So if you add all those up, you've got some pretty serious numbers that affect everybody here. With CWD, it's not outside the likelihood if we could have a decline in 10% of our participation. 10% reduction in participation equates to $55.3 million of economic loss that we would have in this agency, just at a 10% reduction. So 10% less hunters, 10% less deer harvested, that affects everybody. And what does that look like through time? That's just year one. So whether you hunt, whether you don't, CWD can be a huge factor in our economics, in our way of life, really, for a lot of us. Some things that we are doing as an agency besides testing, ways that we're trying to mitigate, reduce our chances of getting the disease here. So these are some new laws that have gone into effect over the last couple of years or very recently. We're requiring the disposal of carcass parts by taxidermists and processors. So going back to our previous conversation, they're getting all that high-risk material. We want to make sure that that's disposed of properly by those groups. So working with them to make sure that happens. We have a complete carcass importation ban. So if you go to another state and you harvest a deer, you cannot bring that carcass back. We've had a similar restriction in place for a long time, but it's only been from CWD positive states. But the way CWD is popping all across the eastern US, that you can't hardly keep up, and it's confusing. You got to stay up to date. So you're seeing this now where many states are doing this, where you just cannot bring an entire deer or elk back into the state. So this was something that we enacted when Tennessee found it in December. Did this through an executive order that was signed by the governor. I mean, the governor worked with us and did that for us because it's a big risk. It's a concern of ours. So making sure that if you're a hunter that you travel, be very cognizant of what you bring back. Quarter that animal, leave that infectious material there, bring the meat back, bring you a clean skull plate, leave the rest there. Working to tighten up on some of our testing on our cervids and the way we capture cervids and the way we move them. Working with glad to see Dr. Stout here and Department of Agriculture. While we're here, we are going out across the state, informing our constituents, informing our hunters about the disease, what it is, what it isn't. We've had a lot of stuff on our Facebook page, on our website, these forums. This video is going to be posted online, trying to get our hunters aware of our actions as an agency so they're informed about the disease and know what to do if they travel and if they hunt. And then lastly, continue testing. We will continue to do that. We're based off of our funding, try to increase our funding levels. We have to pay for that as an agency. We're not getting federal dollars for that. That comes on the back of all our sportsmen and women. So the sale of hunting and fishing licenses are essentially what funds our testing. So we have a very limited amount of money. We try to work with the federal government, try to find outside ways to get more money to help us test. What can you bring back to Kentucky if you harvest a deer or elk outside of the state? Meat would be one. Clean skull plate, clean skull cap, teeth, hide, finished taxidermy work. Essentially what you're not going to be bringing back is the spine and the brain. So if you bring that skull back, that skull has got to be completely clean of all material. So all that out. So when I think about it, a European mount. That's what's acceptable to bring back. Not one that you've scooped the brain out and cut a lot of the meat off. That's not acceptable. It's got to be completely clean. We still want you to be able to go, bring back your meat, but the best way is just leave all the bones, bring the meat, and bring a clean antlers back if it's a male, and go at it that way. I want our hunters to be able to use our taxidermists in this state, and there's ways you can do that. You can talk to your taxidermist. When I travel out west, I'm not real comfortable on how to cape one, so I'll use a local taxidermist to cape it correctly for me, prep it, put it in my cooler, and off I go, because I want my money to come back to this state. And that's what I'd recommend all y'all do. A lot of great resources online that teach you how to cape one. Go talk to your taxidermist if you're getting ready to go, give you some guidelines how to do that. It's not that difficult. It's a little intimidating, but once you do a few, it's not too bad. So carcass movements. I want to show you as an example of why this is so important. We've talked a lot about this. What's the big deal? All right. Here's the state of Wisconsin. In 2006, in the 2006 hunting season, Wisconsin DNR looked at all the locations of where hunters came from and harvested deer in 4 counties. So those 4 counties are up here at the top: Dane, Iowa, Richland, and Sauk counties. So that southeastern corner. So their CWD zone. Where did all those hunters come from that harvested deer? And so what they did is if they harvested a deer in that season, they took their zip code and they put a red dot on the map. You can see the entire outline of Wisconsin right there by red dots. If you then take that and you expand it to non-residents, where did all the non-residents come from that harvested a deer in 4 counties in 1 year? That's all their zip codes. 1 year. So a couple thousand deer. It represents every state in the U.S., including Hawaii and Alaska. We have no idea what they did with those animals, whether they harvested them, left them there, they brought them all back whole, they got them mounted. You look at Kentucky, you're going to see some red dots. There we are. There's Louisville, Fort Knox, Bowling Green, Paducah, all across the U.S. Why we care so much and where we're putting so much emphasis on how hunters treat carcass material from harvested animals. Something we never thought about a decade ago. You know, I would say the majority of those animals that they shot in those 4 counties up here were probably processed and mounted there in Wisconsin, but we don't know. You know, it's fairly entirely possible if I'm over here in Iowa just a couple hours away, I'm going to shoot my deer and take it back with me. So why it's so important if you're a traveling hunter to be cognizant of that, be aware of that, take a little extra planning before you go, take the supplies, process that animal, quarter it, leave all that infectious material behind, and leave it there where you harvested the animal before you come back to Kentucky. So what can you do? What can you do to help us in this fight? And we've talked a lot about how the disease works, where it goes, what it looks like, some common sense practices that you can do here in Kentucky and also if you travel. One, just wear rubber gloves. I mean, that's just craziness. Wear those, you're not too tough. Put them on, you know, go ahead and process your deer, dispose of those gloves when you're doing that. That's just good common sense practices. Minimize the handling of the brain, the spinal cord, and the fluids inside the spinal cavity in the brain. In most cases, you don't even need to be in there to get all the meat that you need. So just avoid that as much as possible. Wash your hands as soon as you're done, as quick as you can. Go ahead. Get that blood off of you, clean your hands. Another just good practice. Debone your carcass. Avoid consuming. We know when you're processing that, if you process your meat yourself, look for those lymph nodes. Try to get those out. Those nodes are all across the body. You look at that picture there, that's where the majority of those yellow areas are. Those are your high infectious material, high infectious parts. So look for those nodes, discard those when you're gutting the deer or when you're processing it. Animals that look sick or test positive, don't eat them. I'm not that hungry. You know, if that animal doesn't look right, it's not worth the risk. If it's positive, I am absolutely not going to eat that. Not that hungry. So you can make that call, but that's up to you. If you take your animal to a processor, ask if the processor will process it by itself. You might have to pay a little bit more, but you know, maybe that you are reducing your risk of contaminating something, so get it done by itself. Talked about this already. If you see a sick deer or an elk, call us. Please call us. Let us know about it so we can get out there. And then lastly, you know, follow all state regulations and recommendations regarding carcass disposal and movements. One thing to think about if you travel that I haven't mentioned is it makes sense to think about the state you're hunting in, probably the state that you're coming back to, but you also need to think about all the states you travel through. Because if you've got that deer, you could be, you know, if you're going to Colorado, you're going to go through 6 or 7 different states, depending on your route. They all have different laws. So take a few minutes, look at that, be aware of what those rules are so you're not illegally importing it. But the best school of thought is just quarter it and leave it be and move on. Unfortunately, this is not our example. We cannot do this. We can't be like Trump and build the wall with Tennessee. So you know, this is the reality that we're dealing with, what lies against us or where we are. But we want you guys to know what we're doing, why we're here, and I hope you found this presentation interesting, useful, taught you something. And with that, I'll take any questions.
One of the biggest things in a risk factor is the carrying capacity, the number of deer, density in the area, as I understand it.
Well, yes, density. We know density can play a role in that.
Okay. So are we working to lower the density in high-risk areas?
We are. If you're a deer hunter, you've seen some of the radical changes that we've proposed and pushed out there for more hunting opportunity, increased bag limits in places. 1/3 of our state, we're over population goal. We need to be bringing that population down. And you know, we're blessed in this state to have lots of deer and lots of opportunity, but we pride ourselves in deer hunters as being managers, and we're not really doing our end of the bargain in some places. So we're asking you to help us take an extra deer or two, you know, especially if you're in a zone 1. Being number 1 in a zone 1 county is not a good thing. You need to bring that down. We want that county to be a zone 2 or zone 3. Seeing 60 to 100 deer sit is not good.
The other half of that question is of course, the human disease factor. How many parasites and diseases do deer carry that can infect a human being through consumption or handling?
I have no idea, but there's plenty.
And yet, the only time we've ever heard about safe handling of deer is with CWD.
Yeah. And that's why I was saying it's just good practice to wear gloves, to wash your hands. I mean, we don't think about those things, but that's a real risk. And with CWD, in most of the cases, that animal doesn't die from CWD, it dies from something else. So it just like us, you know, you get really sick from something, a lot of times that's not what kills you, it's pneumonia or it's another infection or something where you're weak, your immune system can't fight it off, and then you're susceptible to another disease and the compounding effect, and it gets you. Same concept with CWD.
It seems like we are now, our whole thing is being reactive to, you know, the potential of CWD, and once we discover it, then we're going to react on how we do it, so on and so forth. Why aren't we spending a little more energy on being proactive and really talking to people about why we need to kill the deer, really talk to people, instead of scare tactics about if we get CWD, you know, we're going to lose 10% of our economy and so on and so forth because hunters are going to quit hunting, because CWD might cross the barrier even though there's no proof. They've tried it, they can't get it to happen, so on and so forth. No scientist is ever going to say absolutely positively it can't happen. So consequently, it's always out there, it's hanging out there. But yet we have all these other things, and I think that just focusing it on after we get CWD and blah, 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 is putting the, you know, after the cow's out of the barn.
Well, I'll answer that with, that's why we're here. You know, why we're here is to teach you all about the disease, what it is, the measures that we have put in place, the things that we're doing and we're working on. And, you know, a lot of this was about, not so much about what we'll do, but what it is, some measures that we can all take. So it's an education campaign. We can create all the laws we can in this state, but if our hunters and our people don't abide by it, we can't catch them all. So it's education. Why we're here, why we want to educate you, so you can take that back out to your walks of life and educate your folks that you will run with, so we can all do our part. You know, maybe we've not done things the best of our ability as an agency in the past, but we got to start, and we're starting right now. And it's, you know, it's a forward-stepping progress.
You've done several of these.
Yes, so this is our third, this is our fourth in 4 months. A lot of stuff on our website, new Facebook page, new website. We're trying to get that message out. We need your help.
I had several of them, but I've lost 2 of them in my mind so far going over this. But this is like the 3rd time I've heard you talk on this. And you're not really going into details from what I've seen tonight on what you're prepared to do. All I've seen that you're saying so far, you're just going to be looking for deers of that stature. Let's go to baiting. You stated on the thing there to begin with that it's not been seen that baiting has anything to do with disease, but that's one of your preventive maintenance or preventive thing is to ban baiting.
Ban baiting once we detect it.
Once you detect it, that's what I'm saying. You're saying that you're not saying that would be the cause of it, but then you want to ban something other that you're not sure that that's the cause or not.
No, you didn't hear me correctly. So the act of baiting doesn't introduce CWD, but once you have CWD, it increases its risk and increases the spread of the disease. So by me putting corn out, that doesn't increase CWD if we've not found CWD. But once CWD is on the landscape and everybody's coming in to eat on that corn pile, you're increasing your modes of transmission at that point. So it's baiting, you know, putting out a baiting ban At this point, when we've not detected the disease, is not something that we're going to say, yep, that won't prevent CWD of bringing in. It's not, that's not bringing in CWD. What that is a preemptive measure that if it is here, it's not spreading it quicker.
Okay. The second question I remember is you talked about working with the processors and stuff about destroying the tissue and stuff with the taxidermists and stuff of that nature. How do they destroy it? How do they get rid of it instead of throwing it back out in the fields?
So they have to dispose of it in a couple different ways. One is put it in the trash can and it goes to a lined landfill. So either or, trash can, take it directly to a lined landfill. Bury it in burial. And then thirdly, incineration. Those are your 3 approved methods for carcass disposal. Burying how deep? Regulation is 4 feet, but the way I look at it is for taxidermists, like you would in a landfill. But the way I look at things, if I'm talking to a hunter and saying, if you've got a deer and you want to reduce that risk, deep enough that a scavenger, a predator can't dig it back up, dog, and get it. So you want to get it deep enough that somebody's not digging it back up and dragging it across the landscape.
You stated that saliva was one way to pass on the disease from deer to deer. So that prion is present in that saliva?
Absolutely.
Is there any research going on that would allow for or test for that in that saliva for the prion so you could test live deer?
There's lots of research going on in live testing. The problem that it is, it's not so much if they find it, that's easy. We know we can detect the disease in lots of different tissues, but it's where it's found first. So it's these false negatives. So if you test a lymph node, for example, and it's not one of the lymph nodes in the brain, and it comes back as not detected, that animal still could have it. It's simply not been, that prion has not moved to that part of the node yet. So you have to go to the very source where it's found first, where that animal has it. So we don't know at what point it's detectable in saliva. And that's the hard part. It's easy we know if it's positive, but if it's not detected, it doesn't at this point give us a real warm fuzzy to get that.
Gabe, you've taken the best of a lot of plans from around the country and put them together in a nice hybrid plan, and congratulations for that. I've got one salient question is, it doesn't have any prevention to it. You're talking about what we're going to do when we find it. Let's talk about what we can do to keep it out of Kentucky.
So I think that the way we look at things is that's our response plan. I mean, a prevention plan that's what we're doing daily. It's what we do with the commission. That's what we do with you guys, is hearing those things that you recommend, looking at new science, proposing that to our commissioners, and enacting new laws. If there's something out there that we think is important that helps reduce our risk, we're going to take it to the commission. So that's an ever-evolving process that we're doing and we're working on. And going back to the slide of the things that we're doing and have done, same thing. So if I'm going to write a plan on prevention, I'm just going to take it to the commission. We're going to enact it.
Agreed. We need to talk about wildlife check stations on the on the bordering roads. We need to talk about, and thank goodness Ag's here, we need to talk about increasing the fencing around these captive cervid facilities. And there's no reason just to test the first 10 deer that are killed on a shoot and take place. If we're going to test 10 of them, we might as well test them all.
We can do a lot more. We can definitely do more as an agency, but it takes effort and finances and sacrifice by a lot of things. There are some things that we could do that lower our risk that might not be real popular with hunters. And so we have to work on this education campaign. We all have to understand what's at risk and be willing to sacrifice a little bit for the greater good. I use this example on some of my talks. When you think about our forefathers and the turn of the century in the 1900s, what they were able to do to stop the complete, removal of game, put in all the laws that they did, and now we're blessed with that herds, those hunting species that we have. We're kind of at, the way I look at it, we're at that same opportunity. Our actions now on what we do with chronic wasting disease will affect generations, that we will never see those rewards. I won't see it. My kids might not see it. We're going to be dead and gone. So our actions greatly impact the next half a century to century.
Gabe, I got a question. I think some of the area in Wisconsin, they actually established eradication zones and went in and tried to intensively take out all the deer, I guess, that they could possibly take out. What good is that going to do when the feces and the urine have already put the prions into the soil?
Good question. We all look at Wisconsin and say, man, they really screwed up. They didn't do that right. But they were the first. They didn't know what they were dealing with. They didn't know about prions in the soil and in the plants and the contamination. They had no idea. So we're learning from their failures. And, you're not going to see eradication or removal in most cases. It was fully ingrained in the landscape when they found it in Wisconsin. At that point, you're just trying to slow its progression. You're not going to remove it. Except the examples would be New York. New York is one where they found it in the captive industry and they found it in the wild. And they think they found it really, really early. They went and they put a lot of pressure on that herd. They had some target removals. They found it the next year. They found it for 2 years in a row, and they've not found it since. And they test hard. And so we've been 13 years in New York. So far, that might be the example in Ohio as well. So time will tell. That's the importance of why we test, why we do what we do. If we find it, we can find it early. Really slow it back. We don't want to be like Tennessee. I mean, I'm straight up honest. We don't want to have that example as like Tennessee does. At that point, they got to walk away and slow it at a huge, huge example. So, that's what we're trying to do. Good question, though.
Hey, sir, while we're on the fecal and urine topic here, what implementations or testing is done on store-bought urine?
So, store-bought urine is a couple different things. So there's been a pretty big movement on the urine industry for hunting to try to self-police that group. They're aware that urine has prions. They could be increasing CWD. And so that industry has taken extra steps. And that's all been fostered through the Archery Trade Association, the ATA. So they've created this program that they take the USDA, the national guidelines that they have as all the captive service facilities have to do, and they've taken it to another level by themselves, self-policing, if you will. So restrictions on movements, they're not moving deer, they're testing every animal, they're having a veterinarian come in and inspect them and audit them multiple times to really make sure they're doing things correctly. And if they adhere to this program and they pass all those standards, that they are what they call ADA certified or ATA accredited. So Archery Trade Association accredited. And what that looks like is if you like to use urine or you go to the sporting goods store and you look for deer urine, you're going to see a little check mark on that bottle. And that means they're in the ATA program and they're accredited through this. So what I try to recommend is if you like to use urine as a lure or attractant for deer, when you go buy it, look at those bottles. Look to see if it's got that check mark. You're going to have a much lower risk of infection if it's natural. Now, a lot of them produce synthetic urine, so you need to read on the back of the label, see if it's natural or synthetic. If it reads natural, look for that check mark. That check mark usually is on the bottle and the packaging. And so it's a little white kind of Nike check swoosh. So that industry is working very hard to make sure they stay relevant and they're still able to do what they do. The one good thing about the urine industry is that the dirty little secret of that all is it's really only a handful of producers in the country where the urine comes from. So they get all the urine in these big 55-gallon jugs and they ship them off to all these different producers where they take the urine, add something or not, distill it, whatever they do, and sell it for $50 a little ounce. But it's only coming from a handful of people, so there's not a lot of players involved. So that industry has the opportunity to really work to help that. So look for that when you're out there in the sporting goods store this fall. Good question.
Yeah,
Hold on.
I would like to echo what other people have said about double fence the captive cervids. I think that's critical to do that. on both sides, for wild and the captive cervids. And then I think as hunters, we need to do a couple of things. One, we should stop baiting, and we need to shoot more deer. And if we could get a longer season, maybe into January, for a modern gun, modern gun is by far the most effective. If we can extend modern gun season, I think that would be critical too, and especially in Zone 1 where I hunt.
And the challenge for all of us as hunters, and if you're hunting in a Zone 1 county, is, you probably are taking all the deer you can use already. So what do you do with them? You want to donate hunters for the hungry, but we're limited. We can only process the ones we can pay for, and we're using those funds every year. So we have to think about things differently on what we do things. Maybe you're willing to pay for the processing yourself, or donate to Hunters for the Hungry financially, or take a deer. But we got to start thinking outside the box on how we reduce these populations, and we're using hunters to do so. That's got to be the focus, that hunters are doing that.
You showed us in several different ways that Western Kentucky is probably the greatest risk for CWD. Do you have any plans for any kind of educational sessions like these west of here?
That was where our first one was.
Where was it?
Paducah. Well, it was Camp Curry, so just outside. And so we're doing this more, and while we're filming this, we're trying to put out that word.
It does need to spread. I mean, there's plenty of people over there that I argue with all the time, about CWD and what to do about it. And there's a lot of, as you said, a lot of misinformation out there, and we need to get the truth out there.
You can go to Dr. Google and do a quick search, and you're going to find all kinds of stuff.
Yeah,
it's
you can
crazy.
find a lot of bad stuff.
So, and that's why I wanted to make sure you had our presentation, the brochure with a link to our website. That information is factual there.
Just a quick rule idea. For a hunter that could legally take an obviously sick deer and chooses to do so and then report that, seems like it would be, I don't know, it would encourage hunters to legally take sick deer and turn them in if they could get a new tag after that, I mean, I would definitely, I would not really want to waste a tag on an obviously sick or dying animal, but I would do it out of like a duty to do the right thing. I'm sure you can encourage people if you would maybe give them another tag for doing that. But the question I had was, it seems that with the amount of testing that you can do, maybe just over 1,000 or however many you said each year, versus the millions of deer that we have in Kentucky, I mean, it's just simply not even possible to test a very big fraction of that number. So it seems to me that there is a deer in Kentucky right now that has chronic wasting disease. I just don't know how that's not possible. And if I'm right about that, or whether I'm not, it seems that the spread is easily, I guess, restricted by banning the baiting. It doesn't make sense to me to allow it when you can't even test a fraction of the deer in any given area. I don't need to bait. It just doesn't make sense to me to allow that risk. If a whole population of deer, in the thousands that you can't even test one, they're licking on the same salt block for 2 weeks and then walking 3 counties over and licking on another salt block. It's just a matter of time.
Right. I mean, and that's the elephant in the room, in my opinion, is baiting. Is we all have different opinions upon it, and we're, as hunters, pretty polar opposites. I mean, it's your God-given right to bait, and then there's some that are very adamant against that. And so we got to bring ourselves together. One thing deer hunters are really bad about is fighting amongst themselves, and that's very unfortunate, is that we need to work together. We're too busy squabbling, fighting over weapons or season dates or bag limits. There are bigger fish to fry, if you will, and baiting is one, and that's got to be a grassroots effort from our hunters that say we want to do this as the majority, because if it's not, it can be a very, very ugly thing.
When we have to have this discussion about ending baiting, and it's probably coming, It needs to be an inclusive discussion, and we need to keep in mind, in my opinion, and I wasn't going to make a statement, I was going to ask you questions, so I'm going to say it now, but we need to be cognizant of the fact that we've been baiting for a very long time. And the balance in your presentation, I think, is very warranted, not just the economic impact, but in the recruiting, retainment, and reactivation of hunters. There's some folks that have been born and raised on it and don't know how to hunt otherwise. So a phasing out of baiting while we use our teaching of people how to get back to the basics of woodsmanship might be something to consider. The question I have is, as a leader in a couple different conservation organizations, we try to generate as much interest as possible for this event. The fight that I had on the phone and in my circle that I run around with was, if you look at the Department of Fish and Wildlife's deer study, a major EHD outbreak killed almost 20% of our deer herd within the last 5 years. That's over 160,000 deer, up to 200,000 deer, depending on where the estimate's at. We haven't had one die on CWD. I believe myself to be an intelligent person, but I could not make a very good argument for that. I need your help, and my question is, can you help me argue for you in that EHD CWD argument? Why should I be so scared about CWD, and why aren't we doing more for a disease? I understand where it comes from. It's a virus that is born on a vector of a bug. I get it, but I need to make a better argument, and I need your help to make that argument.
To me, it's pretty easy. CWD is it's fatal. There's no way to prevent it. There's no way to adapt. There's no way to be exposed and survive. EHD is the reason we have it at the severity that we did, and a lot of times is our deer aren't challenged. So it's kind of like the flu, if you think about EHD. And the flu and how you get the flu shot. So you get this modified live or dead vaccine that you create antibodies, and then when you're exposed to the flu, you're resistant to it. Same concept with EHD. So we only see HD every 5 to 7 years. Well, why do we see it every 5 to 7 years? What's the lifespan of a deer? 5 to 7 years. So what's happening is we have the disease. Most of them are completely naive to it. They either die or they're exposed and they survive. If they are exposed and survive, they're producing antibodies. They're passing that off to their offspring. That works through time, and then till you completely turn over your herd, they're completely susceptible again. All the right conditions come back. You have the disease, boom, you have another big die-off. The South experiences EHD every year. So Florida, Georgia, Alabama, the South, they've got it. Those deer are challenged by it, and they survive 95 to 99% of them every year. Where we are in the country, we only see it every couple of years. And as you move farther northward, they see it even fewer. So if you move south, they've got it, they're just not dying from it. So we're just in this weird spot in Kentucky, Ohio, Missouri, where we don't have the midge. We got to have the right conditions. It's associated with drought and mud that replicates that. So, it's... Is it the EHD outbreak halted by hard frost? Right, so it's killing the bugs that's persist in the environment, that's passing on the disease that's biting the deer. None of that stops CWD? No, there's no way to stop it. And the other thing that's nice about whitetail is they're like rabbits. They respond like that. And one thing about the 07 outbreak is that it was very clear that we lost a lot of deer, and we looked at our harvest, and our harvest was down, but so was our participation. So in some of our counties in our outbreak around Floyd, McGough, and Martin, we had a 50% decline in licenses. So half the people didn't even go. And so if half of your hunters are even not hunting, what do you expect? At least a 50% decline in harvest. So we had that going on. We had a lot of hunters that said, I'm not going to hunt here, I'm going to go somewhere else, and they traveled. And you look at 2000, like last year, it responded nicely. I had hunters call me, man, there's deer everywhere. It wasn't as bad as what I thought. EHD can really hammer one little drainage, you hopping up over and go to another ridge, and they're perfectly fine. You can wipe out a deer in one drainage, one herd in a drainage, hop over and be good. They're going to filter back over. You're back to your normal level in 2 or 3 years. So it's going to replenish itself. CWD, completely opposite.
I can make that argument, man. Thank you.
Good. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Quick question for you. Looking at this carcass movement map from 2017. I've seen this map a couple places, and one of the things I'm wondering is, have you guys made any attempt to reach out to the hunters who have hunted in those CWD hot zones? Obviously, that information and data is out there. I'm sure Wisconsin DNR has a database just like you guys do that has all that information in it. And I think it'd be pretty simple to get in contact with these guys either through a letter or a quick phone call. Ask them if they got a deer and what they did with it.
So we're trying to take it to another level, to be honest. I meet with all my counterparts in the U.S. annually about deer management. And that's one thing we've talked a lot about, is that if we can all enact rules that don't allow you to take that carcass out, that one stops the problem. Well, all 50 states getting on board on the same rule is pretty dang difficult. But we can all do our part. We can all try to do that. And then it's also education. So for you guys, if you've bought your hunting license in Kentucky, one thing that we started this year is right there on that hunting license, there's a statement about if you hunt deer or elk, be aware of the carcass transportation laws in Kentucky and other states. So we're trying, both here in Kentucky and all the other states, to put these little information blurbs in all these different ways that we consume material and information. You know, that's the challenge. When you look at everybody in this room, we get our information in very different ways, whether it's social media, the paper, print, the word of mouth. So as a small agency, we got to think about all these different ways that we're telling folks, both here in the state and other states. So we're working hard here and nationally at trying to do that. And then there's also kind of really getting in the fish and wildlife agencies and hierarchy. There's what's called an Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, AFWA. So they're like this big umbrella group that have come out with recommendations to all the states on best management practices on chronic wasting disease. And that's one of those things, is informing hunters, sharing that data with other states about where those hunters were. When we found out Tennessee was positive, I called up Tennessee and said, hey, tell me the people that were from Kentucky who shot a deer in those counties this year, so we can follow up on that. So we're doing that now to try to work with that to make sure we're reaching out to our folks. Yeah, Jamie?
Just a couple of comments for you. You know, I've done a lot of extensive research on this. I have mapped it. I have followed it. I've got paperwork that will fill this room about it. And one thing is in common about the whole thing. If we don't come together as a nation, as a country, as a community, stop your farming, stop your baiting, and put nature back in nature, and let it work the way it's designed to work, the way it worked 30, 40, 50 years ago, even longer, we're going to be in trouble. You're not going to stop it. It's not going to go away. Once it comes here, it's going to stay here. You're not going to redivert it. There's no miracle cure for it. All the other states have tried the same thing we're going to try, and it's going to do the same thing that it's going to do here that it's done there. It's not changed. Once you're a CWD state, you will never not be a CWD state. We need to have the conversation now to how to turn it around. I think that is more important than trying to manage something or trying to control something that we're not going to be able to control or manage. I think it's futile. I think it's wasteful. I think we're spending money where we don't need to be spending it. I think that, you know, if you want to see God smile, tell him your plan, because it won't come through. That's my thought about it. Thank you.
The gentleman over here, I think, posed a very interesting question about why we are putting so much emphasis on CWD. And Kelly may have other ideas about this, but it's not a proven public health disease risk, but BSE is. And in reality, unless the statistic has changed, there's been one American ever die from BSE. And that American got it in France. But yet we have spent millions of dollars on BSE testing and surveillance to support an industry that was virtually closed down in 2003 when we found a cow that came from Canada. Canada at one point in time was losing $11 million a day on cattle sales because of BSE. And I look at it, part of the problem is fear of the unknown. We don't know much about prions. We don't know that tomorrow somebody won't die from eating deer meat from an infected deer. Another species that also has a TSC, sheep and goats, have scrapie. And scrapie's never been really identified to cause a public health problem, I don't think, Kelly. But it is also incriminated as maybe being the source for both CWD and BSE. So we know so little about prions. I've been in this job for 16 years, and I didn't know that such a thing as a prion ever existed. Dale, I don't know whether you had it in school or not, but it's a pretty new concept that's not really understood. And we say it's not a virus. I'm not even sure it's a chicken or the egg thing. Does a virus cause the unfolding? We don't know these things. And so what we don't know scares us. And I think you're doing the right thing. We're trying to do the right thing in agriculture to control the disease. But we could be overreacting, but we can't take a chance because of what the unknown could bring to us that we don't have any idea of.
And that's the hard thing is, I mean, you heard about what we know and how it moves, and it's kind of hard to fathom. And so a lot of times when you can't understand it, you stick your head back in the sand or make light of it about it. And it's tough. It's a difficult situation. The thing's not alive. What do you mean you can't kill it? And so you make light of it. It's not really something you need to make light of, even though it's a difficult process. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to echo some of the comments that have been made about baiting. And, I'm like anybody else, I enjoy watching a new hunter or somebody being able to take a deer over a corn pile or, whatever the case. And I know there's a lot of history behind that, even mineral. But when we look at the environmental persistence of the prions and that once they're there, it seems like that's something that we could really affect on the front end. If I did my math right, we're testing 0.02% of the deer herd, right? So by the time we have a positive hit, emergency regulation, how far along are we in reality? So, I look at the writings of Leopold or maybe more recently Posowitz on our ethics as hunters and people who have been entrusted to continue conservation, not just in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, but nationally and internationally. I think we have a bit of a commitment to the people who've done work before us to really think these things through, and that, it might be a little difficult to shoot a deer or maybe get a trail camera inventory over your mineral site, but we need to slow it down. I mean, we're not going to stop it. It's going to be here. I don't think that's any question in anybody's mind, but what can we do to prevent the spread and help the herd overall?
You have a slide that identifies lymph nodes aside from the organs. How do we identify those lymph nodes?
Good question. Lymph nodes usually going to be, the size of a normal node, like the very end of your pinky. Going to be a little bit firmer in consistency than what muscle would be. Usually encapsulated by a lot of non-organ or meat material. I'm trying to, if anybody else wants to jump in and try to explain what they look like, but usually a darker. Yeah, they're gonna feel thicker and more firm, like a kidney. If you've ever grabbed a hold of a kidney, that's kind of but a much smaller lima bean type. It's not going to be in the middle of the meat, attached to meat. You can pull it apart. It's going to be its own little thing, and it's going to look a lot different when you cut it open.
Not really a question, just kind of a statement. I know that the commitment of the department is to take care of our wildlife and fish environment, and I would just encourage you that when we're discussing this baiting, we continually take hunters into consideration. I say we look at what the resource requires, and then we'll support that. But rather than worry about what hunters want, let's worry about what the deer herd and the elk herd needs, and then we will stand up like we always do.
Any other questions? Got one more. Two more.
The last one I had a while ago was I was just thinking about, you was talking about earlier about it being into the soil. Is there a test to how long it would stay in the soil, or is it there forever?
We don't know that yet. I mean, this soil thing has really been in the last 2 years. So now that we know that it's there, and we're looking at sometimes it breaks it down, sometimes it's there, how long does it persist? And to do that research and to do it right, we're talking years worth of time. So you got to be able to know that it's there and then watch it through that soil to see how long it persists. Also realizing that different soil types, it's going to last longer. You got to think about precipitation, vegetation type, there's so many different factors that go into it. There's not a blanket statement that would apply. So at this point, not sure. We don't know those.
Okay.
And research hopefully will tell us in time.
The other part to that is I know we haven't had it here and hadn't had to deal with it yet, but you was talking about how they dispose of them and stuff, and you were saying earlier about digging it at least 4 foot deep. Okay, how long is that carcass, if it's got it, going to seep up through the soil?
Well, hopefully at 4 feet deep, it's not going to seep up through the soil unless you're dealing with a high water table area. But that's the concept, is that it's deep enough that it's not going to.
First off, Gabe, thanks for having this. I know it's this, and everybody involved. I know it's kind of probably like the grenade in the room that you got to kind of dive on and talk about this. So I appreciate you having these forums and kind of getting the word out firsthand. I had 2 questions. I'll try to keep it short as possible. You talked about, I guess, first year, the kind of the plan if it was found, and kind of proceeding from there. Using Missouri and Tennessee as an example, what would those 2 variations look like? If it's a very localized finding, what does that reaction look like? And say something happens and there's a pocket like Tennessee and we just find all these animals, what does that scenario look like?
Okay, good question. So we'll use Missouri as the example first. What Missouri's doing is they're increasing their bag limits around that, that one positive, trying to get hunters to take more. Mandatory testing, so they're having check stations, they're coming, they're collecting those samples. And then they're looking at how many samples they've collected. They're going to have a very high target for that area. And then if they don't meet that with hunters, what they're doing is going in as an agency and target calling, target reducing to get to that number. So very high effort in reducing populations, keeping that population in check and low, and try, you're not eradicating deer. You're not stopping them. That's not possible, I don't think, anymore in today's day and age. But you're trying to maintain it or lower that number. So that's what they're doing around those small single little pockets. Tennessee, on the example, where they found it in that endemic area, let me get back here. So what Tennessee's going to do at this point is this endemic area where they've got it, right there just east of Memphis, they're pretty much just going to walk away as an agency. There's nothing they can do to prevent it, to stop it, to eradicate it. And so all they're going to do is provide check stations there and avenues for hunters to come in and get their deer tested to see if it's positive or not, in order for them to make an effort to see if this animal is safe to eat or not. So that's what they're going to do in the endemic zone there. Now, kind of what we call as sparks or flyers, these ones off to the north and to the west, where there's just one, they will do what Missouri is doing. So they're really going to ramp up on harvest, increase bag limits, mandatory testing, have these big sample goals. If they don't reach those, they're going to probably go in and shoot some deer, try to reduce that population and slow its progression. So what they're doing is they're just moving bigger. So they know they've got it here, they're trying to contain it in a bigger area, deal with those sparks as they shoot out, and many times that's a yearling deer that's got the disease that walked away, so trying to slow that progression.
Okay, second thing, is there any program or means in place or being looked at in the future that a hunter could send sample deer in and then receive results on that specific animal?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and we would do the same.
Is that in place right now?
No,
okay.
Not right now. So for us, if you want to have your deer tested right now, we could potentially pull that sample and we'll send it off with our batch of samples, but it's going to be a month or two, a couple months before we get that result back. When we detect the disease, all that changes. So we go from months to literally days. So So when you bring us that deer, we're turning that sample around. It's a more expensive test. It's a little bit, it's more costly, but we need to do that. That's our role as Fish and Wildlife, is to inform our hunters. So we would then provide that service if you're in the CWD containment zone. If you're outside that zone, we will potentially work with you, but at least point you in places where you could go get that animal tested if you want it. If you want to have your deer tested, I'd recommend you reach out to your local conservation officer or specifically your local biologist. So if you get on our website, there's that Find My County contact, find your local biologist, give them a shout, and we'll see where we are. You know, we have that targeted approach. The stipulation we give our staff is once you meet that quota in your county, stop, because we need to focus elsewhere. And we're also going to kind of tier our animals that we test. So, you know, we're going to try to focus on those older age class and not take a lot of samples from a fawn or a yearling because they've not been on the landscape. So you call me and I've got a fawn that I harvested, I want it tested, I'm probably not going to take it in most cases because it's just not worth our effort.
Congratulations, Gabe, on your outreach for this. It worked pretty good because I see a lot of the leaders for the local sportsmen's organizations in the room. QDMA, Hunters for the Hungry, Safari Club, a number of us are here and we're all interested. We've linked your website to ours or ours to yours for the CWD information, and I would encourage everybody else to do that also. We're also going to ask you to come and give our annual membership meeting a little shorter briefing of the same thing if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
But, you know, outreach is going to be your win or lose situation here.
Mm-hmm.
So congratulations on that. That was an attaboy.
Thank you. Hey, it's not me. It's everybody else sitting around in this room. I mean, they're the ones that make it happen. I'm just the talking head you get stuck to listen to for 2 hours.
Gabe, something I would suggest maybe, or maybe you already have in your, your equation and stuff, but a lot of conversation about baiting and, of course, a lot of talk and need or recognized need to reduce the herd. If we stop baiting completely, will we be able to reduce the herd, especially in those areas where it's critical? In other words, what's the impact of baiting on actual harvest? And
that's a good question. We don't know. There have been some states that have had that discussion that if we do away with baiting, we'll actually decline in our harvest. You dump out some corn, it works in a lot of places if you're not very selective. So, when the majority of our hunters in this state hunt over corn, that's a real potential. Now, is that reality? I don't know. We could try to get at that, but maybe a restriction on how much. There are all kinds of avenues we could go down, and that's where we need you. What do you support? How do you help us in that endeavor? Because it wouldn't be a pretty thing.
Hey, Gabe. Thanks for the presentation. I've actually learned a few things I didn't know. I did want to say I was part of the last deer working study group. And I remember when we sat in the same room 2 or 3 years ago and Dr. Carlos brought up Jacob's disease. And when he was done talking, you could have heard a pin drop. I thought one point of that group was to discuss the CWD because I know we talked about urine and baiting. So I'm hoping if that group's resurrected like it was brought up at the last commission meeting, that will be the main focus, CWD.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely that plan to put a CWD working group together. We're in that phase right now. So I anticipate you'll hear some of that at the August committee meeting, September commission meeting. You've got commissioners sitting here, you got executive staff here. We can talk a little bit more about that, but yes, that's the plan, to put a big group together. Any other questions? If not, thank you all very much. This has been fun. Appreciate the information. Thanks for coming.